Chapter 5. I went upstairs and discovered Selina engrossed in Landor's imaginary conversations. When Selina was 18, she is now 24, Don Alfredo Robinson, one of the American residents, had, upon her father's request, sent to Boston for a library of several hundred books, a birthday present for the ambitious daughter of the Iturbi y Salas. The collection was excellent, and a ranch would not have satisfied her as much. She effortlessly read English and French, although she spoke both languages with difficulty. As I walked in, she put the book down and clasped her hands behind her head. She appeared calm, but not as friendly as usual. "You've been far away from the gentlemen and ladies of Seal Bay," I said, "not even among Spanish spirits." "I think you only care about your books," she replied. "And a few people and my faith," I added, "but they come second, even if you won't admit it to yourself. Imagine if you had to choose between your faith or never reading again. What would you choose?" "Oh, my goodness, what a question. No Spanish woman has ever been a more devout Catholic, but reading is my happiness, the only happiness I desire on this earth." "Are you certain that cultivating the intellect leads to happiness?" I asked. "Absolutely. Doesn't it give us the ability to detach ourselves from life when we grow weary of it?" "That's true, but there's another consequence you haven't considered. The more developed the intellect, the more sensitive and assertive the nervous system becomes. The stronger the memory, the more one has to contend with, and the loftier the ideals. When the time comes for you to experience life, you will suffer with twice the intensity and profundity of a woman whose nerves are dull or underdeveloped. To suffer, one must love, and I will never love. Who is there to love? Books always satisfy me, and I suppose there are enough in the world to keep me occupied as long as I live." I didn't continue the debate, knowing the calm confidence of inexperience. "But you haven't told me yet which one you would give up," I remarked. "The books, of course. I hope I know my duty. I would sacrifice everything for my faith. But the priests don't meddle now like they did in the last generation. I was very religious back then, and I fully supported it. I've always said that the church can let women read whatever they want. The good principles they are born with, they will stick to. We are naturally conservatives, that's all. And we need religion. We have to have something to rely on. And men are not reliable, from what I've observed. Sometimes, after reading for a long time in an engrossing book, especially one that seemed to stimulate my brain and make it feel more alive, I realize that I am far away from the church. I've forgotten about it. I always go back. God, I should think so. Yes, it's good that we need our religion. Men don't. That's why they abandon it as soon as their minds start to expand, just like they would discard the heavy blanket of the Native American, borrowed and gratefully worn in gloomy, uncertain weather, when the warm sun comes out. I don't dare ask Jose Melendez what he believes in case he tells me he believes in nothing and I have to listen to it. How do you like my friend Selina? Are you asking me how I feel about the enemy of my family? I hate him. If he goes to Santa Barbara with Machado this summer, will you invite him to stay with you? Of course. The hostility has always been disguised with a lot of politeness, and I want him to see that we know how to host. I secretly observed her. I couldn't see any sign of interest. Eventually, she picked up the book by Landor and read aloud to me, the elegant English sounding peculiar with her Spanish accent. Chapter 6. At 10 o'clock, the spacious hall of the governor's house was filled with guests, and the sounds of the flute, harp, and guitar wafted through the open windows. The musicians sat in the hallway. How enchanting was the ballroom at Seal Bay in those days. The women wore elegant white dresses made of luxurious fabrics, while the men donned white pants, black silk jackets, and low-leather shoes. The only bursts of color came from their jewelry and the radiant faces of the southern elite. The plain, unattractive hall, devoid of its unsightly furniture, required no adornments with such captivating beauty. Even the elderly, with their coffee-colored skin and full bellies, had a picturesque quality about them. Sometimes I stroll through those abandoned halls, and as tears well up in my eyes, imagination and memory fill the cold rooms, causing me to forget that the dashing gentlemen and lovely ladies who once called Seal Bay their own, turning it into a living picture book, now rest beneath the overgrown grass and thistles of the deserted hilltop cemetery. The Americans are scarcely aware that such a people once existed. Selina entered the hall at 11 o'clock, resembling a queen of snow. Her golden hair, always shining like metal, was styled to resemble a crown. She wore a gown made of Spanish lace, with no jewelry except for a string of black pearls. I had never seen her appear so distant and regal. Melendez stepped onto the hallway. "Play El Son," he commanded firmly. Then, as the lively music began, he approached Selina and clapped his hands in front of her with the same authority he had shown the musicians. Such actions were common in Californian ballrooms, but she looked defiantly rebellious. He continued to clap his hands, gazing down at her with an amused smile that flushed her face with anger. Her hesitation sparked the enthusiasm of the other men, and they cried out loudly, "The sun! The sun, miss!" She could no longer refuse, and, passing Melendez with her head held high, she slightly nodded to the gentleman and made her way to the center of the room, while the other guests moved back against the wall. She stood there for a moment, gently swaying her body. Then, lifting her dress just enough for the lace to brush against her small, arched feet, she tapped the floor in perfect rhythm to the music for a few moments, before gracefully gliding across the sala, her slender body forming beautiful lines, revealing every detail of the sun, oblivious to the soft ripple of approval. Then, dropping her dress, she spun the length of the room like a white cloud caught in a whirlwind. Her clothes rustled, her heels clicked, her movements grew faster and faster, leaving the spectators breathless. Unfazed by the lively melody, she slowly descended, swaying languidly, her long, rounded arms sometimes resting in the lace of her dress, sometimes gracefully sweeping and curving. The gentlemen shouted their admiration, showering her feet with gold and silver. The sun had never been performed with such variations before. I had never witnessed such enthusiasm until the night that marked the climax of Julia Herrera's tragedy. Melendez stood captivated, observing every move of her body, every expression on her face. Her cheeks blazed with color, her eyes sparkled wickedly like green stars. The cold curves of her statuesque mouth became warm and soft. Her chin was playfully raised, and her long, wavy hair cascaded down to her knees, a shimmering veil. Where had the doomswoman, the proud daughter of the Iturbi y Salas, gone? The girls felt a little frightened. This was not the sun they were accustomed to. The young married women frowned. The elderly folks exclaimed, "Wow! Oh, my God! Oh, my goodness!" I was shocked. Even though I knew her well, this was a bold and unexpected move. As the dance continued, and she became more and more like a wild and untamed forest spirit, even the gentlemen started to feel uneasy, despite their admiration for this captivating and beautiful creature. I looked at Melendez again and understood that his heart was filled with passionate empathy. "I have discovered her," he whispered with excitement. "She is California, magnificent, daring, incomprehensible, a mixture of both good and bad, an elevated woman. She has shed all traces of tradition." At one point, as she passed by Melendez, their eyes met. They shared a moment of recognition before she averted her gaze and continued floating on. He left the room, and when he returned, she was sitting on a window seat, surrounded by gentlemen, as calm and pale as when he had commanded her to dance. He did not approach her, but joined me at the upper end of the room, where I was standing with Machado, the Castros, Don Thomas Larkin, the United States consul, and a few others. We were discussing Selina's interpretation of El Son. "That was an unusual outburst for a Spanish girl," remarked Mr. Larkin. "She is Selina Iturbi y Sala," Castro replied sternly. "She is unlike any other woman, and what she does is right." The consul nodded. "Indeed, Colonel. I have not encountered anyone like Yolanda Selina here. Californian women have a delightful consistency, reserved, modest, yet dignified, always on guard. Yolanda Selina transformed so rapidly from the typical woman of her heritage to a seductress, almost a reveler. Only an extraordinary refinement of her nature kept her on this side of the line, preventing her from being labeled as eccentric by an American." Machado raised his hand and pointed through the window to the stars. "The glowing embers in the celestial fire above are not beyond criticism," he said. Yolanda Modesta raised her eyebrows. Embers are safest when burned in the home fireplace and carefully monitored. Even safer when they have turned to ashes. "What is this rumor of pirates on the coast?" demanded Machado abruptly. I put my hand through Melendez's arm and pulled him aside. The music of the contradanza was playing, and we stood against the wall. "Well, you know Selena better since that dance," I said to him. "Prominent stars are not unlikely to have volcanoes. It's better to leave the depths alone, my friend. The lava might severely burn you. Women with complex personalities are intriguing subjects, but dangerous to love. They wear the nerves thin, and the exhausted mind and heart gratefully turn to the clear-minded, idle woman. She is too much like yourself, Jose. And you, how long could you love anyone? Love for you means curiosity." His face turned pale for a moment, an indication for him of suppressed and intense emotion. Then he turned his head and looked at me with a slight smile. "Not entirely. You forget that the most unfaithful men have been the most loyal when they have found the one woman. Curiosity and fickleness are simply parts of a restless quest, nothing more. I was certain you would perform admirably, but you possess a wicked charm and you never hesitate to utilize it." He laughed openly. "One would think I was a rattlesnake. My wicked charm consists of a reasonable amount of skill born of a great weakness for women and some personal magnetism, the latter the result of the habit of mental focus. And an unwavering determination. Perhaps. As for the exercise of it, why not? Long live frivolity. It is pointless to argue with you. Are you going to leave that girl alone?" "She is the only girl in California whom I will not leave alone." I could have shaken him. To what purpose? And her brother? I've often wondered which would control you in a crisis, your rationality or your emotions. It would depend on the crisis. I'm afraid you're right. That pompous Samboro will cause trouble. Is it true that he has been conspiring with Santos, and that an extraordinary and secretive session of the Departmental Council has been called? He looked down at me with his sternest smile. "You inquisitive woman. You mustn't interfere in the departmental affairs. If you were a man, with as sharp a mind as you have for a woman, you would be an asset to our politics. But as it is, forgive me, it's better for our balanced country if you have less to do with it." I could feel my eyes narrow. "You have no respect for a woman's intellect," I said fiercely, "only for her appearance. But I won't argue with you. Tell that young man over there to come and dance with me." At daybreak, as we entered our room, I grabbed Selena by the shoulders and shook her. "What did you mean by such a spectacle?" I demanded. It was unheard of. She threw her head back and laughed. "I couldn't help it," she said. "First, I felt an irresistible urge to show Seal Bay that I can do whatever I want. And then, there's a wild part of me that has often threatened to break free before, and tonight it did. It was that man. He provoked me. Oh God, I thought, it has already begun." Chapter 7. The celebrations were set to endure for a week, with everyone participating except for Machado and Yolanda Santiago. Yolanda, being not robust enough, and the governor prioritizing duty over enjoyment. The following day, we indulged in a light afternoon snack on the hills situated beyond the town. The lush pine forests were lively with the vibrant hues of the youth. Here and there a gentleman dashed up and down to show his horse riding skills and the silver and embroidered silk of his saddle. Silver, too, were his jingling spurs, the eagles on his hat, the buttons on his colorful silky jacket. Horses, without exception handsomely adorned, were tied everywhere, stomping the ground or nibbling the grass. The girls wore white or patterned silk or muslin dresses, and shawls around their heads. The brown, unattractive chaperones, always by their sides, were contrasts they would gladly have done without. The sound of the guitar never stopped, and the melodious voices of the girls and the deep voices of the men burst forth with the joyful spontaneity of the birds' songs around them. Selena wore a white silk dress, I recall decorated with large blue lilies. The shawl matched the dress. As soon as we arrived, a little late, she was surrounded by gentlemen who hardly knew whether to like her or not, but who adhered to the knowledge that she was Selena Iturbi y Sala, the most famous beauty of the South. "Goodness, but you are beautiful," murmured one, his dreamy eyes fixated on her shining hair. "Thank you, sir." She whispered it as shyly as the young ladies to whom he was accustomed, her eyes fixed upon a rose she held. Will you not stay with us here in Seal Bay?" She raised her eyes slowly. He could not help but feel the effort, gave him one bewildering glance, half pleading, half objecting, then dropped them suddenly. "Will you stay with me?" gasped the gentleman. "Oh, sir, you must not speak like that. Someone will hear you." "I don't care. My God, I don't care. Will you marry me?" "You must not speak to me of marriage, sir. It is to my father you must speak. Would I, a Californian girl, commit myself without his knowledge? Oh, my God, I will. But give me one word that you love me, one word." She lifted her chin confidently and turned to another gentleman, who, I have no doubt, also proposed. Melendez, who had been observing her, laughed. "She's playing the role perfectly," he said to me. "Whether it's natural or learned coquetry, it has more to do with saving her from being just an intellectual woman than her beauty or her father's wealth. I'm inclined to think it's learned. I don't believe she's a flirt at heart, any more than she is the cold-hearted woman she thinks she is." "You should tell her that," I exclaimed angrily, "and she will end up falling in love with you because you understand her. All women want to be understood. Why don't you go back to Paris? It's been a while since you've been there." Not considering this suggestion worthy of a response, he left me and walked toward Selina, who was glancing over the top of her fan into the passionate eyes of a third gentleman. "You're about to step on a bunch of stinging nettles," he said practically. "Your shoes are very thin. You should stand over here on the path." And he skillfully separated her from the other men. "Will you walk to that clearing over there with me? I want to show you a better view of Seal Bay." His demeanor had no hint of chivalry, and she was tired of the gentleman. "Very well," she said. "I'll look at the view." As she followed him, she noticed that he led her where the bushes were thinnest and kicked the stones from her path. She also noticed the nervous energy of his slender figure. "It comes from his love of the Americans," she thought angrily. "He even walks like them, the Americans." And she clenched her teeth together with a sharp click. He turned, smiling. "You look very disapproving," he said. "What have I done?" "You look like an American. You even wear their clothes, and they are the color of smoke, and you wear no lace. How cold and uninteresting a scene would this be if all the men were dressed like you? We can't all be made for decorative purposes, and you are as different from those girls, except for your attire, as I am from the men. I won't incur your wrath by saying that you are American, but you are modern. Our lovely compatriots were the same 300 years ago. Will Yolanda, California, be pleased to see that whale spouting in the bay? There is the tree under which Junipero Serra said his first mass in this part of the country. What a sanctimonious old fraud he must have been if he looked anything like his pictures. Did you ever see a bay bluer than that, or sand whiter, or a more perfect semicircle of hills than this, or a more spread-out town? There is the custom house on the rocks. You will go to a ball there tonight and hear the boom of the surf as you dance." He turned with one of his sudden impatient motions. "Let's ride. The air is too sharp to lie around under the trees. This white horse matches your dress. Let's go over to Carmelo." "I would like to go," she said doubtfully. He had made her throb with indignation once or twice, but his conversation interested her, and her free spirit approved of a ride over the hills without a chaperone. "But you know I don't like you." "Oh, never mind that. The ride will still interest you." And he lifted her onto the horse, jumped on another, caught her reins in case she rebelled, and galloped up the road. When they were on the other side of the hill, he slowed down and looked at her with a smile. She was inclined to be angry, but found herself observing the various expressions of his mouth, which distracted her. It was a puzzling mouth, even to experienced women, and Selina couldn't make sense of it. It had neither sweetness nor softness, but she had never felt compelled to study the mouth of a gentleman. And then she wondered how a man with a mouth like that could have such gentle manners. "Do you know," he said suddenly, "that your brother is accused of conspiracy?" "What?" She looked at him as if she understood that this was the kind of banter that an Iturbi Isala might expect from a Melendez. "I'm not joking. It's completely true." "It's not true. Samboro conspire against his government. Someone has lied, and you're ready to believe. I hope someone has lied. The news is very direct, though." He looked at her thoughtfully. The more obstacles, the better, he thought, and we might as well confront this issue head-on. Besides, there's no point in starting off as a hypocrite when every action would reveal what I think of him. Furthermore, he will have some influence over her until she realizes his true worth. She won't believe me, of course, but she's a woman who just needs a push to do a lot of thinking and observing. "I'm going to make you angry," he said. "I'm going to tell you that I don't share your admiration for your brother. He has 10,000 words for every idea, and although God knows we have more time than anything else in this land of leisure where only the horses run, there are more productive ways to spend it than listening to meaningless and grandiose words. Moreover, your brother is a dangerous man. No man is as secure in seclusion as one with great vanity and small ambitions. He isn't big enough to conceive a revolution, but he's ready to be the pawn of any unscrupulous person who is. And because he's too egotistical to follow orders, he'll end up ruining a project at the last minute by trying to think for himself. I'm not saying these things to insult you, miss, but rather to let you know right away how I see your brother. That way, you won't accuse me of betrayal or hypocrisy later." He had expected and hoped that she would explode in anger, but instead she stood tall and looked at him with a cold arrogance. Her mouth was as hard as a pink jewel, and her eyes were icy. "Sir," she said, "it seems to me that you waste too many words talking about my brother. What you say about him doesn't interest me. I've known him for 22 years, while you've only seen him 4 or 6 times. What can you possibly tell me about him? Not only is he my brother and the person I naturally love and adore, but he's Samboro Iturbi Isala, the last male descendant of our family, and as such I hold him in high regard, second only to my father, and with his blood he can only be a great and honorable man." Melendez looked at her, feeling a sudden doubt. She's stubbornly Spanish, he thought, a loyal follower of tradition. I couldn't be at a bigger disadvantage, but she's magnificent. Another thing that was unnecessary, she added, was defending yourself to me or explaining how you feel about my brother and why. We're enemies by tradition and instinct. We will hardly ever meet, and most likely never speak again. We will speak to each other more times than you can imagine. I have a lot to say to you, and you will listen. But for now, let's not discuss it any further. Shall we ride fast? He spurred his horse, and once again they raced through the pine woods. Before long, they entered the Carmelo Valley. The mountains were massive and gloomy. The small bay was calm and blue. The ocean waves crashed around Point Lobos, and the Carmelo River flowed beneath its willows. In the middle of the valley stood the impressive yellow church, with its Roman tower and rose window. Surrounding it were the crumbling brown huts of the abandoned mission. As they rode, Melendez thought he heard voices, but couldn't be sure because the horses' hooves were so loud. When they reached the square, they abruptly pulled back on the reins, causing the horses to stand upright. Then they heard strange sounds coming from the open church doors, rude shouts, loud laughter, curses, the sound of breaking glass, and songs that had never been sung in Carmelo before. It was a chaotic clash of noise that clashed with the peaceful sound of the waves. Selina's eyes flashed. Even Melendez's face grew dark. The values instilled in their formative years rebelled against the desecration. "Some drunken sailors," he said. "Look over there." A ship rounded Point Lobos. "Pirates!" "Oh, my goodness!" exclaimed Selina. "Let your hair down," he commanded, "and do everything I suggest. We will drive them out." She obeyed him without question, filled with excitement and curiosity. Then they rode to the doors and swung them open wide. The front of the long church was filled with pirates. There was no mistaking those bold, cruel faces, tanned by the sun and wind, with unkempt hair. They stood on the benches, leaned on the railing, and swarmed over the altar, shouting and reveling in wild debauchery. Their rough red shirts were thrown back from hairy chests. Their faces were contorted with booze and sacrilegious joy. Every station, every candle holder, had been tossed to the floor and trampled on. The crucifix stood upside down. Sitting high on the altar, swaying and waving a communion goblet, was the intoxicated leader, singing a blasphemous song of the pirate seas. The voices echoed strangely through the hollow body of the church. To complete the scene, flames should have leaped among the swinging arms and jumping figures. "Come," said Melendez. He urged his horse forward,
and together they raced down the stone pavement of the building. The men turned at the loud sound of horses' hooves, but the riders were in their midst, scattering them in all directions before they realized what was happening. The horses came to a sudden stop. Melendez stood up in his stirrups, his handsome, brave face looking down calmly at the demonic gang who could have torn him apart, but who stood silent and startled, gazing from him to the beautiful woman, whose white gown seemed to be a part of the white horse she rode. Melendez raised his hand and pointed to Selina. "The Virgin," he said, in a deep, impressive voice. "The Mother of God. She has come to defend her church. Go!" Selina's face turned pale, but she looked sternly at the sacrilegious individuals. Fortune favored Melendez's boldness. The sunlight, streaming through the star-shaped window above the doors at the bottom of the church, struck Selina's upturned golden head, encircling it with a halo, giving her face an otherworldly beauty. "Go," Melendez repeated, "or she will weep. With every tear, a heart will stop beating." The leader scrambled down from the altar and ran past Selina like a rat, his swollen mouth hanging open. The others crouched and followed, tripping over one another, their dark, wicked faces pale, their knees knocking together with superstitious fear. They fled from the church and down to the bay, swimming to their vessels. Melendez and Selina rowed out. They watched the ugly ship scurry around Point Lobos. Then Selina spoke for the first time. "Blasphemer!" she exclaimed. "Oh, my God, will you ever forgive me?" "Why not call me a hypocrite?"
It was a situation where either the mind or matter had to prevail, and you can confess your forced wrongdoing, say 100 prayers or so, and be pure again. Whereas, if our Carmelo mission had been destroyed, as it was likely to be, California would have lost a historic landmark. And Junipero Serra's remains are there, and it was his favorite mission, said the girl reluctantly. Exactly. And now that you are reasonably sure of being forgiven, won't you forgive me? I won't ask for a priest's forgiveness. She looked at him for a moment, then shook her head. No, I can't forgive you for making me commit what may be a deadly sin. But holy heaven, I can't help saying it, you are very quick. For every idea is a moment born. The success or failure of our lives depends on whether we combine the two or think too late. Imagine, she said suddenly, imagine if you had failed, and those men had captured me. What then? I would have killed you. Not one of them would have laid a finger on you. But I had no doubts, or I wouldn't have attempted it. I know how superstitious sailors can be, especially when they're drunk. Shall we ride back? They will have eaten all the sweets. Chapter 8. Seal Bay partied every night and all night long that week, either at Machado's or at the customs house, and every afternoon gathered at the races, the bullfight, a picnic, or to climb the slippery pole, catch the greased pig by its tail as it sprinted, or show off their horse-riding skills. Selina, sometimes a demanding flirt, at other times indifferent, stubborn, or teasing, was the undeniable favorite, and the girls either worshipped her when she was absent-mindedly kind to them, or sincerely wished she would go back to Santa Barbara. Melendez rarely attended social gatherings, as he spent most of his time secluded with Machado and Castro, and when he did go, Selina would avoid him if she could. The pirates had fled and were no longer seen. However, their sudden retreat, as described by Selina, continued to be a captivating topic of conversation. There were few of us who did not openly or secretly approve of Melendez's cunning and admire the agility of his mind. The clergy did not express their opinions. On the final night of the festivities, when the women, tired from the unusually late hours of the past week, had left the ballroom early and gone to bed, and the men, lacking other forms of entertainment, had gathered in a group at a bar, where they drank, gambled, and set fire to each other's hair and pants, the departmental junta met in a secret session. The night was warm, the plaza deserted. Everyone who was not at the bar on the other side of town was asleep, and after some initial words in Machado's office, the junta picked up their chairs and went out to hold a meeting where bulls and bears had fought, and the bright, forgiving moon provided clearer light than hard candles. They gathered closely, and after rolling their cigarettes, solemnly gazed at the sky for a few moments without speaking. Their purpose was a serious one, They met to prosecute Pio Pico for disrespect towards the government and persistent insistence in favor of his favored project to relocate the capital from Seal Bay to Los Angeles. Jose Antonio Santos and Samboro Iturbi Isala for conspiracy, and General Vallejo for malicious disposition and unjustifiable remarks about the administration's policies. None of the offenders were present. With the exception of Machado, Castro, and Melendez, the members of the committee were men of middle age and represented the talent of California, Jimeno, Gonzalez, Arguello, Requena, Del Valle. Their dark, bearded faces, turned up to the stars, made a striking set of profiles, but the effect was ruined by the silk handkerchiefs they had tied around their heads. Machado spoke, finally, and after presenting the charges properly, continued. The individual enemy to the government is like the fly to the lion. It cannot harm, but it can annoy. We must brush away the fly as a vindication of our dignity and take precaution that it does not return, even if we have to bow our heads to tie its little legs. I do not intend to be annoyed by these irritating little creatures we have gathered to discuss, nor do I want my term of administration tainted by their bitterness. I leave it to you, my fellow countrymen and friends, to advise me on the best course of action. Jimeno put his feet on the side rung of Castro's chair, puffed out a large gray cloud, and half closed his eyes. He then, for 3/4 of an hour, in a soft, melodic voice, spoke about the dignity of the administration and the wickedness of the wrongdoers. When his colleagues were starting to lower their heads and breathe heavily, Machado politely interrupted him and referred the matter to Castro. "Imprison them!" exclaimed the impulsive general, suddenly awake. With such a governor and such a people, this land should be as pure as the mountain tops, untouched by the tracks of petty ambitions and sinful revolutions. Let us be decisive, though not cruel. Let no man's blood be shed while there are prisons in California. But we must uproot the conspiracy and unrest, lest 1,000 offshoots grow around them, like the half-cut trunks of our redwood trees, and our California be no better than any declining country of the Old World. Let's throw them into prison without any further discussion." "The law, my dear Jose, gives them a trial," drawled Gonzalez. And then, for 30 minutes, he quoted the known laws of the country. When he finished, the impatient and repressed members of the committee expressed their opinions simultaneously. Only Melendez had nothing to say. They argued and suggested, cited evidence, defended and denounced, working themselves into a great excitement. Eventually, they all stood up, gesturing and prancing. "Oh, my God!" cried Requena. "Let's give Vallejo a taste of his own cruelty. Let's put him in a sauna and have his surviving Indian victims roast him." "No, no! Vallejo is falsely accused. He had no part in that massacre. His heart is purer than an angel's." "It's his liver that is pure. His heart is as black as a black snake's. To hell with him. Pass a law that Pio Pico can never leave Los Angeles again since he loves it so much. His ugly face would ruin the next generation. Death to Santos and Iturbi Isala, death to all. Let's drain the poison out of California's veins." "No, no! We want as little bloodshed in California as possible. Put them in prison and feed them beans and water for a year. That will cure their rebellion. No chicken, no sweets, no alcohol." Machado slammed his staff of office on a board he had prepared. "Gentlemen," he said, "won't you sit down and smoke another cigarette? We must remain calm." The committee immediately took their seats. Machado always commanded respect. "Don Jose Melendez," said the governor, "will you tell us what you have been thinking while the others have been talking?" Melendez, who had been gazing at the stars, turned to Machado, ignoring the committee. His sharp, brilliant eyes brought a sense of relief to the governor. His expression showed a determined and uncompromising mindset. "Vallejo," he said, "is like a stubborn horse that refuses to move forward or retreat to its stable. It simply remains still and kicks. His kicking creates a commotion and stirs up dust but does no real harm. In other words, he may annoy, but he never takes responsibility.
Send him an official notice that if he continues to cause trouble, an armed force will march upon Sonoma and confine him to his own residence, publicly humiliating him in front of his soldiers and followers. As for Pio Pico, threaten him with fines and punishment. He will immediately apologize and remain quiet for 6 months, until another secret meeting can be called and another threat issued. To further enforce his submission, order him to appear before the council and offer a sincere apology. Now, let's discuss Santos and Samboro Iturbiyisala. He paused momentarily and glanced at Selina's irritating presence. He had the evidence of her brother's dishonesty in his pocket. No one else had seen it. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then smiled grimly. "Oh, Helen," he thought, "the same old story." "That Santos is guilty," he said aloud, "has been proven to us beyond any doubt. He has incited rebellion against the government on behalf of Carlos Santos. He poses a threat to the country's peace. Iturbiyisala, on the other hand, is young and reckless, not to be taken too seriously. Moreover, it is impossible to obtain evidence of his involvement. His close association with Santos gives the impression of guilt. Perhaps a brief period of imprisonment will serve as a warning to him. He is restless and easily influenced. Teaching him a lesson now may prevent his esteemed family from facing disaster. But Santos deserves no mercy." He stood up and towered over them. "The most impressive aspect of Machiavelli's Prince," he said, "is the author's suggestion to Caesar Borgia to eliminate every member of the ruling family of a conquered nation in order to prevent future uprisings and the subsequent increase in casualties. Don't let any trace of mercy flow in your veins. Your duty is not to protect an individual, but an entire nation." "You're absolutely right," Machado agreed. The others stared at the young man who had simply offered them practical advice on politics, as if he had unveiled the light of wisdom shining from within his chest. His calmness in the face of challenges that drove them to madness had long raised suspicions that he was more than human. They did not voice any objections. Machado's secretary, who had only one eye, took note of their approval. After enjoying another friendly smoke, the committee adjourned, feeling quite satisfied. "Would I jeopardize my country's future for a fleeting moment?" Melendez pondered as he strolled home. "But in the end, little harm is done. He isn't worth killing, and fear and discomfort will likely cure him." Chapter 9. Selina and Melendez stood face to face amidst the Castilian roses in the garden behind the governor's house. The chaperone was nodding in a corner. The eldest child of the Machados, wailing inside, captured the attention of everyone in the household, from the frantic young mother to the practical nurse. "My brother is going to be arrested, you're saying?" "Yes." "And it was your idea?" "Yes." "And he might die?" "Possibly." "If it weren't for you, nothing would have been done?" "Nothing." "Oh, my God! Holy Mary, how I despise you!" "So it's war, then?" "I would harm you if I weren't a Catholic. I will make you forget that you are a Catholic. You have reminded me of it, causing me the deepest sorrow. I detest you so intensely that I cannot go to confession. I cannot forgive. I hope you will continue to hate for a while. Now listen to me. You have several reasons for despising me. My house is the adversary of yours. I am essentially an American. You can regard me as such. I possess that indifference towards religious superstition and intolerance for the dominance of religion which all minds larger than a napkin ring must eventually develop. I have put your brother's life at risk, and I have opposed and will continue to oppose his political ambitions. He has my absolute disdain. However, I inform you here that I would marry you even if you had 500 reasons to hate me instead of a trifling 5. I will take pleasure in proving to you that there is a power in the universe much stronger than customs, religion, or even familial bonds. His eyes were not those of a lover. They gleamed like steel. His mouth was forbidding. She recoiled from him in terror, then clapped her hands together fervently. "Marry you!" she exclaimed. "A Melendez! A turncoat! May God banish me from heaven if I do so. There, I have sworn. I have sworn. Do you believe a Catholic would break such a vow? I swear it by the Church, and I place the entire Church between us." "I just mentioned that I would make you forget about your Church." He seized her hand and held it firmly. "One final word," he said. "Your brother's life is safe. I promise you that." "Release me," she said. "Release me. I am afraid of you." She was trembling. His warmth and magnetism had surged to her shoulder. He returned her hand to her. "Go," he said. "So concludes the first chapter."